the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Well, hello, Sublation Media viewers. Today, you've got a special shit take show for the US shitty midterms. And I'm here joined by the Reverend Dr. John Milton Bunch, who is our swamp thing in Sublation Media.
Good evening, Doug.
Good evening.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. And I looking forward to reporting a bit for a while. We'll see how long we last on this stream. But we have got political news to cover from a Marxist perspective. Of course, my perspective is that the proletariat should simply not vote in bourgeois elections. There's nothing at stake here for us, really, and look away from the screen. But that is probably the jet lag talking, as much as it is any real conviction. How do you feel, Reverend Dr. John Milton Bunch, about bourgeois elections, about this midterm election, about what's at stake tonight?
Well, I don't know. I'm not necessarily a believer in non-participation, but it seems to me that, and I'm going to take an anti-Marxist stand here.
Yeah,
just to have some dramaturgical tension. So it seems to me that if we're going to talk about how the proletariat should vote, we should first talk about who the proletariat are, how those people are voting in today's election. And, to me, from my perspective, and tonight, especially from an anti-Marxist perspective, if the proletariat is unable to vote or is unable to construct a cohesive rationale for how they should vote, then how is it that a democracy in the workplace can be possible? If proletariat isn't willing to participate in democracy, if proletariat is not able to participate in liberal democracy, capitalist democracy, how will it ever participate in a democracy of the workplace where it will be required to extend its cognitive range, so to speak?
I don't know why this anecdote popped into my mind right now as you were talking, but when I was in high school, I for a short time I dated a girl whose father had put a poster up in their house, and the poster read, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And that's sort of how I feel about this idea that if the workers can't participate in liberal democracy, liberal bourgeois democracy, how are they ever going to run a workers' state? The idea that on the subject of, let's say, workplace democracy, which would be an easy way to start, voting on who gets hired, who gets fired, or whether or not you get a raise, or what your quotas will be, is a kind of formal democratic process, I guess, within the workplace. But even if you share in the profits, the workplace will still be operative along capitalist bourgeois grounds. So if the workers are constrained within workplace democracy to stay within the bounds of capitalist political economy, then their lack of participation and enthusiasm for that workplace democracy would be, I think, would be expected. It's in fact a sign that they have some sort of class consciousness, that they are abnegating on their so-called responsibility to participate in a sham of democracy. And that's when you have some control over your workplace. When you're talking about two political parties, such as the Democrats and Republicans, who fail to present policies that are actually in benefiting basic people, everyday people, even on the level of their survival, let alone you know pushing forward an agenda to transform society the way that the Socialist Party would want to. It's hardly any kind of wonder that people would turn away, shrug their shoulders at their civic responsibility to vote. That's my counter.
Okay, so here's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this? What you're talking about is a kind of untapped potential, a kind of you're talking about a sort of potential agency of the proletariat that has yet to express itself because it is constrained by capitalism. That sounds like the argument that you're making.
Kind of, but not entirely. I mean, I think that you can the I'm going to say paradoxically, the place to look to see the power of the proletariat's agency is in the society as it is now, or maybe more clearly to look back upon the last 200 or so odd years of revolutionary change, because it was only with the help of the proletariat that the bourgeois revolutions were able to take hold. It was only with the help of the mass of mankind that the transformation from monarchical feudal power into liberal bourgeois democracies could take place. It was only through that kind of organized proletariat that you could have the revolutionary struggles that we all now can look back on with some patriotic favor. And so I would say that what's happened is that the aim of the bourgeois revolution has been stalled out. It's not so much that that the proletariat consciousness has been distorted by capitalist relations. That may be a partial consequence of the stalling out of the revolution, but that isn't the primary thing that I think has happened.
Okay, so what was the motivation that the masses, as you say, had to facilitate this bourgeois revolution? In other words, what rationale were the masses following? Facilitate this revolution. What was their motivation? What was their goal?
Their goal was, it depends on different goals at different times, but primarily it was, to win the right to their land, win to the power to make sure that they were fed. Often enough it was about being able to hold on to their weapons. I want to answer this question from the chat, though. Someone says, "Didn't Marx think that we should participate in democratic elections?" And what I would say is Marx believed that the social democratic parties aligned with the Second International should compete within bourgeois elections. They should seek parliamentary power when they could, and that the expansion of the right to vote was only to the benefit of the struggle for socialism. So if there were a socialist party running to challenge the power of the bourgeoisie or the capitalist class today, I would certainly advocate that people vote for them. But that isn't the case. So there's that. Should we? But before you respond, should we read some of the? It looks to me like the big news right now.
Yeah. Let's see what we got. We're here to do elections, so let's see what the coverage is here.
John Hoeven in North Dakota has been announced as winning. John Thune in South Dakota has held on. Has won. This is let's see, the Jerry Moran in Kansas, James Langford in Oklahoma, John Boozman in Arkansas. In Illinois, Tammy Duckworth is winning. It's one. In New York, Chuck Schumer, of course. Vermont, Peter Welch. In Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal. We have Chris Van Hollen winning in Maryland. Kentucky, Rand Paul. Todd Young in Indiana. South Carolina, it's Tim Scott. I do not believe that is the Tim Scott from YouTube. Alabama, it's Katie Britt. And Marco Rubio holds on to political power in Florida.
Is have they called Florida?
Yeah, they've called. It looks to me, according to the New York Times, they've called Florida for Marco Rubio.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at. Yeah. I see it. Sure did. Yeah, he 57-41. Yeah, he dominated Val Demings. Wow.
Someone points out that it was not the second international, but the first that Mark.
Well, in Georgia with Raphael Warnock he's holding his own. He's almost 2 points above Herschel Walker. A little bit of an upset.
But the someone says here, Doug, what are you talking about? Marx was dead by the time the Second International was formed. Yes, but I believe Kautsky and others had contact with his spirit. But also, what I meant to say is that there was overall Marx had written about competing in parliamentary elections and wanting to have less. Having more formal freedoms for the proletariat. That would mean, the right to vote, right for free expression, and so forth. But yes, I did screw up there.
Well, here's another question then for you along those lines. I'm trying to drive at something here. Why were things like the right to vote, why were those important to the masses? Why was that important?
Why was the right to vote important? Well, because with the right to vote came the right to gain other kinds of political freedoms, the right to organize politically for your class, the right to have working class parties, and the right to challenge autocratic rule. So the overall the expansion of bourgeois freedoms were and are necessary for the organizing of
See, here's the thing, Doug. Here's how you're. To me, this is sort of how you're looking at this. You're looking at this from the perspective of. To me, it's a classic leftist perspective, right? You're looking at this from the perspective of an increasing freedom of the individual. You've described the motivation of the masses as freedom to this, freedom to that, freedom to, you've described this desire, this drive for these abstract freedoms, right? Now, I would challenge that and say that you can certainly read it that way, but I think a more accurate way of reading it is that all of that is a way to simply intellectualize, or a way to simply all of that is simply in the service of greater material wealth and status. In other words, there's no intrinsic value. In other words, to the masses, to the proletariat, there is no intrinsic value to voting, to democracy, to having an individual right to do X. There is no intrinsic value to any of those, except to the extent they increase material wealth, they increase one's social status, etc. So, that's the way I'm reading it here. So, in other words, the motivation, freedoms, as you've described them, are simply ideological artifacts you know, of simply desire for greater material standing. That's it. And I think that, you know, you see that those freedoms you described, how quickly they're abandoned, or how quickly they, you know, were demonstrated to be, insubstantial, I guess, unsubstantial. In today's election, I mean, not to play the, you know, not to play the repeat the Democratic messaging too much, but I mean, the Republican Party is today is, I mean, it's a fascist. I mean, it's a nationalist. It's a fascist party. I mean, if we define fascism as, like, I think, did Mussolini define fascism as corporate and state power working together, merged together? Isn't that?
Well, if that's fascism, then both parties are fascist.
Well, sure, true. But what I'm saying is the Republican Party makes no bones about. I mean, at least, you know, the Republican Party makes no bones about the fact that they're willing to just flat out give up, to stop making claims about democracy and just say, yeah, we'll trade all of those freedoms for a strong man and the promise of greater material wealth.
Okay, well, I want to address your first point about material wealth, and that being what the true motivator was for the working class struggle and for bourgeois revolution in general. And I think that you are not wrong in a sense, but you have to recall that the changes that took place on the level of production also had a political component to them, that they could only happen. The increase in production, the bringing together of people to create commodities en masse, and to innovate technology, all of that could only happen in a context in which the old order, the feudal order, the monarchies were losing ground. It was
Right.
And that was not
true.
And that was not an accomplished fact when the political struggles were taking place. And those political struggles were over power within the system that existed, and they were that power was justified as by the ideology of freedom, as a struggle for freedom and equality and brotherhood and so forth.
Because those things were considered commensurate with an increased share of the wealth. In other words,
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but
right.
But today,
people were tired of starving. Absolutely, people were tired of having these imperial wars in which the everyday people, the workers and some parts of the aristocracy, even and the landed classes, would be the ones who would suffer. They tired of kings that would tax and tax for insane reasons without any regard for what the needs of the peoples were.
Mhm.
That there was absolutely a component of seeking after material gain and material comfort, and just making sure that everyone had bread and a chicken in every pot, or a pot in every chicken. I forget which is how it goes.
See, I would say it's not, the goal there wasn't to make sure everyone did. It was to make sure I did.
Yeah, but if you're part of the working class at that time, or the peasantry at that time, then struggling for the freedom of your class is the struggle.
True, right. But you see how that could be considered a historical artifact? Just the fact that at that particular point in time, the economic system had generated a group that fit that criteria, but that may not exist anymore.
Well, I think that it does still exist, that the power of people working collectively is demonstrated all the time, and that the ways in which just within capitalism is demonstrated all the time. and the difficulties that we run up against as a people and individually often can be chalked up to the way the current system is inconsistent and puts a limit on our ability to be empowered and creative and seek after our own interests individually and collectively. I mean, just the fact that we're still looking at the possibility of a nuclear war, some 20 years after the collapse of the Cold War and the Soviet system, is in and of itself a reason for the everyday people to be completely disenchanted with the political powers and the classes that run the world today. I mean, that should be behind us.
Sure, I totally agree. But again, that's just, I mean, I totally agree. I just don't know that has to do, I don't know that has anything to do necessarily with class or with
if you could think, it has to do with class in this way. If the world were run in the interest just of working people being as productive as they could be in their own self-interest, then it would not be run. So, as a competition between great powers vying for territory and a chunk of the surplus and control over the global monetary system and cultural battles and so on.
Right. Okay. I understand what you're saying. I would just counter that by saying I don't think it's necessarily capitalism that brought us nuclear weapons. I mean,
obviously
it was capitalism, but I'm saying there's something. In other words, had the technological, now capitalism, of course, worked to rapidly advance technology and make nuclear weapons possible, and
you think if kings had nuclear weapons?
What's that?
It's the proposition is like,
2,000 years ago, had a Roman emperor had a nuclear weapon, had a Chinese emperor had a nuclear weapon. Do you think they'd have used it? Probably. You know what I mean? Had they if they had the technology.
I guess. I mean, it just seems like an absurd proposition. How many people were there in the world at that time, and how were the battles run, and if they had used a nuclear weapon, what would the likelihood have been that not only would they have destroyed their enemies but themselves in one, with one push of the button, and would there be a future bourgeois revolution if the Romans had nuclear weapons and used them? I mean,
what I'm saying, the propensity to develop and use a nuclear weapon has little to do with capitalism. Capitalism, I mean, certainly capitalism is the historical engine that allowed it to actually happen. But the human desire for domination and martial superiority, I don't think that has anything to do with capitalism.
No, but I don't think we can conceive of nuclear weapons just as an extension of that sort of transhistorical desire for power.
I think we can, absolutely. I absolutely think we can. I mean, I don't think. I mean, it's certainly possible that you could have had some kind of. Well, think about Rome. It's certainly possible that had Roman centers of learning like Alexandria and so on, had those not fallen to historical forces of Rome falling and Christianity rising and so on, they could have developed technology. They were on the forefront of weapons technology at the time. They certainly could have developed, certainly possible. I mean, they could have developed nuclear weapons. It would have been another few hundred years, I suppose, but certainly could have happened 1,000 years before it did.
Well, okay. I mean, I just think that you're tending to focus on the the question is to what degree do large groups of people who are trying to organize socially rely upon hierarchical centers of power and domination in order to maintain cohesion? It's sort of the question you're asking in a roundabout way, because
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a good question to ask. I just happen to think that if you're talking about specifically about nuclear weapons or even the machine gun or mustard gas, that the innovation of wars, the innovation that we saw in the 20th century applied to weaponry and weapons of mass destruction of all types, has to be laid at the feet of capitalism, and not only because the technology wouldn't exist without capitalist and innovation, but also because liberal bourgeois values are ideologically necessary for capitalism to develop. So the standards of capitalist society are constantly being violated. Whereas if you have some emperor who claims to be a divine authority drop a nuclear bomb somewhere, well, there you go. I guess he really is God's friend. It doesn't really, it's not any kind of violation of the system. I mean, it would be a terrible atrocity. And I guess, Roman law was a precursor to bourgeois law. So it may have been a violation of some principles that were in Rome, but nonetheless, I think that we have the right to try to stand up for the values of the society that we're participating in and insist upon them being fulfilled.
I was just thinking about like Archimedes. You ever seen the diagrams of Archimedes and his various weapons of war?
I don't know if I have.
Ancient Greek. This was 2nd and 3rd centuries BC, right? I mean, he's got, this guy, one of the, geniuses of the time. And, what he's remembered for now are these crazy instruments of war he designed. Some of them so brutal and seemingly sophisticated that we aren't sure today how he actually pulled it off, if he was actually able to do it. Like there you go. That's the Greek fire. And then there's the Archimedes death ray.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to me, this clearly throughout all of human history, there's been, one constant drive to create better weapons than the other guy has.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say, this is one of the reasons I collect guns, is because, we don't like to think about it, but the fact is that the world we live in is controlled by weapons technology and designed, or not controlled and driven by weapons technology more than it is anything, more than it is ideas, more than it is ideologies. It's simply, who has the best weapons. I mean, that's why I collect military surplus weapons. You can see throughout history, the transition from bolt action to semi-automatic and automatic and burst fire and yada yada. And if militaries had the advanced technology, they get to write history, and the proletariat adapts.
Well, I'm going to talk about some governors now.
Okay.
Let's see. In South Dakota, no, I'm going to start. In Alaska, none of the votes are in. Okay, here we go. In Florida, DeSantis is now the governor, continues to be. Kemp.
What's the score in Florida?
59% of the vote went to DeSantis.
Jesus. He's killing Charlie Crist then.
Yeah. In In Georgia, Kemp has won 52.6% of the vote. Kansas, 59.3 has gone to Kelly, who's the incumbent. In Maine, it goes to the incumbent, Democratic incumbent Mills. Maryland, Democratic incumbent with 73% of the vote. I don't know how many are reporting here, but goes to Moore. Massachusetts is Healy, is a Democrat, is winning about the 19,000 votes ahead. Whitmer in Michigan, 53% of the vote, with a little less than about 43,000 votes ahead of Dixon. I want to know about, let's see, the Fetterman.
He's so far he's winning. I was looking at that in Pennsylvania. So far he's got a comfortable lead right now. I don't know though what percentage of the votes in. I'm looking at just Senate results.
I want to get back into this conversation about, to what degree would it be possible for there to be let's say an international socialist or communist society based on the free creative participation and production of civil society, with a minimal administrative state, and without the need for tribalism or the breaking up of the population along ethnic lines or in some other way and without the need for future warfare. That is a utopian vision, right? I
Yes.
agree that is the
utopian dream.
That is the dream of the socialist.
That's right. That is the utopian socialist dream. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Utterly unobtainable, but that's the socialist vision. Sure.
Well,
I mean, I don't know how else to
then you
say
say it's unattainable, but your evidence is in history, that has the tendency for people to be violent, the aggressive drives have created a propensity for both authoritarian rule and war and violence between peoples in the past. And that's a transhistorical fact. But I guess the premise of socialism is that because we have seen massive changes in the ways that we have organized ourselves socially, and we've seen peoples come together into one nation, for instance, that had been divided and even at war with each other in the past, that this is within the realm of the possible, and then the argument from a Marxist would be to say, the economic system that we have now sets up contradictions internally, and then also those contradictions can lead to conflict between nations and between even neighbors. The reason that we have police and jails in a capitalist society has to do with the inequality that is endemic to capitalist society. And so forth. So if we could properly explain our own system to ourselves and understand it and modify it, do you think that there's a chance that while maybe the aggressive drives wouldn't disappear, they would be sublimated, not sublated, but sublimated in a different way?
Okay, I think that when you describe a possibility, I think you're right. It is possible. What we have to think about is what's probable. And, there are lots of possibilities, but I think it's highly improbable. And here's the reason. I mean, I don't know. This is going to, again, this is going to sound elitist and a bit arrogant. And it just is. But it's not arrogant because I'm not trying to act like it's not arrogant, but it is elitist. And that's simply that when, Doug, you describe the goals of leftism, the goals of socialism in the classic way. It's also a very upper class well-educated way of viewing the world. It's also a very upper-class, well-educated, particular personality type way of viewing the world, right? I mean, you know, everyone has their own goals for everyone's got their own individual model of how the world works, of how the world should work, right? And my argument, part of my argument is that those models are intrinsically different. Doug Lain is genetically designed to approach the world differently than I am. And I'm genetically designed to approach the world differently than the next guy is. So, what you get then across a broad population is you get a small number of Douglas Lanes with this. I mean, it's appealing to me too. You know
Hey, John, how many kids have you had? How many
Two.
kids you? All right, so I've had 4. So my numbers are growing. Okay, and yours are just holding in place. So don't say that there's only a small number of lanes. There more lanes are coming, but
but they're going to be genetically different because I mean, look, my son's a vegan. I love the kid, but there's a genetic difference there. I'm sorry, there just is. So, he didn't get that from my side of the family.
Yeah.
So so it's like so I mean, there's just differences, right? One of your kids could be a secret Trump supporter. You don't know. Could happen.
I have some idea which one it is. Okay, so I want to read this quote. I flashed it on the screen just a moment ago, and I'm going to read it again. So, Adorno, happy-go-lucky, always fun to have at a party. Theodore Adorno says, it's quoted here: "No history leads from savagery to humanitarianism, but there is one that leads from the slingshot to the megaton bomb." So there you have, well-respected. Often he's accused of being an elitist.
Yeah, he's very elitist. I've read some of his stuff talking about jazz and stuff.
Yeah. Well, he was complaining about like kind of the Lawrence Welks of the world, really. He was, but nonetheless, but Theodore Adorno, Mr. Pessimism, he said that, but he said that in the context of being a Marxist, of being an advocate for socialism still. But what do I take away? How do I take that out of the mouth of the Reverend Dr. John Milton Bunch and put it into my own mouth and read that same quote? And I would say that what he's pointing at is the fact that as long as human history is history that's led by kind of unconscious motivations, history that is taken to be kind of in a Whiggish way, maybe progressive, like it just automatically achieving its goals.
Yeah.
Then we cannot expect anything other than what we've seen, which is a history that goes from the slingshot to the megaton bomb. So the challenge would be to take up a responsibility for our history, to understand both our unconscious, maybe in a psychoanalytic way, and also the material relations that set that up, and well enough that we can dare to alter them, and create a different trajectory.
Well, see, that again that's back to the core of our leftist vision. This idea that somewhere deep inside, this is to me, I'm in agreement with the people who say that, like Alex Stair, what the heck's the guy's name? The guy was a faculty at Notre Dame. Anyway, I'm of the opinion, I tend to agree with the people who say that Marxism evolved from Christianity, from the Enlightenment need to create a secular soul, right? In other words, Christianity, or at least a lot of Christianity, was predicated on the idea that you have this eternal soul, right? It's this divine spark, and this is what ties the human to the universe, is the soul, right? Everyone's got this unique divine soul that, right, what a soul is. Okay, so as you know, as we moved into the Enlightenment period, intellectuals, of course, had to reject the idea of the supernatural. So the soul then became, adapted as this, what adapted into this sort of, it's if you read like from Emerson to, like, have you ever read the what do you call them, the God damn it, it was New England 19th century
I don't know if I've read that or not, John.
sorry. Ralph Emerson was a proponent of.
Oh, right, Ralph. Okay, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Transcendentalism.
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, the American Transcendentalists. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
The American Transcendentalists and Emerson, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, I think, and you can, Nietzsche reflects some of what you read in Emerson, and it was, what the Transcendentalists and Emerson proposed or suggested was, again, that there's this divine spark within humans, right? Again, they wanted to describe it in supernatural terms, but they nonetheless described it as this kind of, like Emerson described, he'd say, I'm a transparent eye, I can see all at once and none at the same time, and yada yada. So, and Emerson sort of saw at the core of every individual was this connection to this natural connection to the universe, and it sort of, I described it kind of like there's a vault, like all humans are connected by this lava that flows, across like all human existence. And anyway, point is, it was a way to intellectualize and supernaturalize the human concept of soul, right? Mm-hmm. So the Enlightenment writers, like culminating perhaps with, certainly towards the end with Marx, you have this Marxist vision of this individual awareness of freedom, or this propensity for freedom at the core of the individual, which needs to, and which needs to be emancipated, right? We have got to create these conditions, these material economic conditions in which this inner seeking of freedom can express itself. Wouldn't you agree? That's
yeah. I mean, I would just say that that my view of religion is that it is not to just be, religions are not just, shouldn't just be discounted. Like as human beings have developed socially and developed their consciousness, they've worked to describe and understand the universe to themselves and to each other, to themselves, and religions have been one way that they have done so. And there are lots of the question that you have to ask, when it comes to questions around, let's say, the vision of a soul that you're describing that's in transcendentalism. You have to ask, okay, so what kinds of assumptions are there here that should be questions that aren't being questioned? Can we see where the weaknesses are in the argument or in the worldview? Mm-hmm. And what is still, what do we feel is justified in being taken up there? So the Christian view of a, let's say a heaven where everyone puts down their arms and the lion lays next to the lamb and so forth. I wouldn't take that as an article of faith, but and I wouldn't necessarily want to impose a human vision of peace upon the lion and the lamb. I mean, maybe that lion should be allowed to slaughter as many lambs as he wants, but the overall idea of not just a peaceful coexistence or mutual cooperation for the sake of survival, but also the idea of collective cooperation for the sake of the development of our abilities and the deepening of our understanding and the creation of meaning, that these things should be at least, taken seriously enough to be challenged slowly and methodically and without cynicism and without any kind of knee-jerk desire to belittle and denigrate the human subject or the human condition, which I think has a lot more potential than we are, inclined to give it, especially in a society in which we're constantly making excuses for our own failure to live up to our initial ambitions. That's. I know I'm just countering your assertion with my own here, but and I know that you're thinking, yeah, this is very much you can characterize it as a elite educated. I mean, I only have a college degree from a state school. I'm hardly some great.
Well, you're very well read. You're in an economic situation where you have time to pursue your own intellectual interests and so on. You don't necessarily have to have formally gone to XYZ years of college. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, I do read more than is the average person, and it is like I do it professionally now. And I often feel quite inadequate given that that's what I do, and how inarticulate and so how expansive the realm of ignorance is in my own mind. So anyhow, I just believe that, back to what started this conversation, I believe that people who are looking at this circumstance right now and deciding to stay home and not to bother with voting are no more morally suspect than some pundit who is telling himself and his followers that it's very, very important that X party remain in power or get pushed out of power, or that it's very important that everyone turns up, and that can't be justified.
No, I agree. I'm not making a moral argument. I'm not making an argument that I'm not making an argument moral argument one way or another about voting here at all. I'm really coming up more with a
someone says, Douglas, just get a master's degree at Harvard already. I should. I'll just run right out and do that. Go ahead. John.
No, I'm not making a moral argument about voting or not voting. I'm just coming up with more of an explanatory model why people vote the way they vote. Or
right.
Don't vote.
Right. So I don't know if I've had a chance to say, but it looks like, according to CNN has filled in my home state of Colorado blue, which is sort of interesting because, when I was living there, it was a pretty Republican state, but apparently as of now, Michael Bennett has won, according to CNN, in Colorado. So
it seems to me that, I've never really read this, but I've done a lot of work in Denver in particular over the years. And it seems to me that Denver's about the only place where there's a big population. So if it's in Colorado, and a lot of people that live in Denver move there from the West Coast. So it seems like, you know what I mean? So it seems like you kind of got this big bubble of kind of blue in Denver. And even if the whole surrounding area might be red, but given that, just about everybody lives around Denver, it's going to make it a blue state.
I grew up in Colorado Springs, which has about 500,000 people in it right now, which is much bigger than it was when I was there. Population of Denver is 700,000. So Colorado Springs, nothing to sneeze at.
And that's conservative. We used to be conservative.
Pretty conservative, but I wonder if it's become less so as it's grown.
I don't know. It's interesting. But I just know that when I would go to Denver area, most of the people I would work with had moved there from the West Coast. Very
Right.
few. I mean, not. I mean, there were some native Coloradans, but most had moved in.
I just pulled up a article from the Rocky Mountain PBS, and the headline is: As Colorado Springs grows, will its conservative political base remain? So the rapid growth has been changing the demographics of Colorado Springs, and it is an open question how conservative that city will remain, according to this news report from the Rocky Mountain PBS.
See, I think Florida is a state that the Democrats really screwed up on, because Florida voted for Obama. It almost voted for Gilliam over DeSantis in the governor's race last time. DeSantis won by a fraction of a point. And when you look at constitutional amendments in Florida, Florida passed $15 an hour minimum wage. One of the only states in the country to have that. Florida passed. I would have passed medical marijuana. I did pass medical marijuana. I would have passed recreational marijuana and other. I mean, Florida's kind of, to me, Florida is really more. It's got a lot of conservative elements, but it's also got a lot of more, I don't know, sort of more, I guess you would say, cosmopolitan elements, kind of like Denver. I mean, if you go to Tampa, Miami, Orlando, those cities are a lot like Denver. It's in that most people that live there move there from somewhere else, and they tend to be blue. But you go outside the city and there's a lot of red. But to me, the politics, when the typical Floridian is, I mean, they kind of have this kind of libertarian working class perspective, which could have been Democrats could have crafted a message to capture that, but they didn't. I feel like the Florida vote, Floridians who could have been in the Democratic camp, I think were driven out of it by cultural issues, upper class cultural issues in the Democratic Party, which completely, blew it out. But anyway.
I just want to announce that I went into YouTube Studio and monetized this stream. So if anybody wants to toss us a super chat, they now can.
Oh, cool. And we'll answer, ask a secret question in a super chat and we'll give you the answer.
Yeah. Or just say something that you think is worth everyone seeing, and whether it's a super chat or not, we'll flash it on the screen. According to New York Times, right now, the Senate is a toss-up, leaning slightly towards Republicans. If you're looking at their needle, although that is not at all an accurate way to measure this right now, but they're saying it is a toss-up, whether it will remain in the hands of the Democrats or go Republican. The House is leaning Republican as of right now. This is pretty much matches up with Nate Silver's prediction, his forecast, and most of the polling, which said it's very likely Republicans will take the House, and it's even conceivable that they will take back the Senate. I don't see any new developments in terms of states announcing. I am hoping to, I'm curious to find out who will be the governor of Oregon. After tonight, I voted for the Working Family Party, of course, because what else was I going to do? But in any case, how about you, John? Do you have any feelings about? I mean, I started off saying, people should just not vote at all, and then it turns out I did vote.
I voted. Yeah, I mean, I voted. I can't help it. On the one hand, I mean, honestly, the Republican Party is just so utterly stupid. I just cannot. I cannot bring myself to vote Republican. Just can't do it. Democratic Party is horrible, but it just seems every time with every election, the Democratic Party just seems slightly less horrible than Republicans, and I end up voting Democrat, fully realizing that this is really it's really just this political theater to give the citizens a feeling of control over a system they really have no control over. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, but
we just got a $5 super chat. Thank you, Nance.
sweet,
Someone
thank you,
says,
Nance.
happier to listen to this than sit and stare at MSNBC alone in my chonies. More hot takes, please.
There you go.
Yeah, well, we'll do our best.
I
don't know if I agree with you that the Democrats are smarter than Republicans.
I mean, I'd hate to. I don't want to put too much emphasis on the word smarter.
I mean, Trump takes up so much oxygen and he does come across as
he's a fascist. Come on, he's a strong
okay. Let's talk about whether or not Trump is a fascist. I don't think that he is, and here's why. I don't, because the definition of fascism, as per Mussolini, is when you have a very strong centralized state leading the corporations and business.
To me, that's Trump.
No, we saw that Trump could not do that during the COVID lockdowns.
Aspirational fascist. Perhaps that's a better way.
I don't think he aspires to have that much control over business in America. I don't think he wants to be dictating to business what they should produce.
I think he absolutely does.
You do?
Yeah, you think you remember all his various pronouncements on I mean, it's hard with Trump. It's impossible to know what he actually wants or actually would do. But given his various pronouncements on Facebooks at his rallies, remember he declared, what was it he declared, or he issued a tweet that demanded all countries stop doing business in China. You remember that? I mean,
yeah. Well, okay. Well, that's not the same thing as having state control over your over the economy. Say we want to try to. I mean, look, if Trump said stop doing business with China in a tweet, the Biden administration has imposed draconian sanctions on Russia.
I'm not claiming that the Democrats are. I mean, you're right. I'm not claiming there aren't authoritarian elements in both parties. Certainly there are. Mm-hmm. I'm just claiming that, to me, the Republicans right now are so close to a stereotypical fascist uprising that it's too unsettling to vote Republican. So that's why I voted Democrat.
Well, okay. I think what you're talking about there is, okay, I guess the biggest bit of evidence to suggest that Trump is an authoritarian who wants to smash the two-party democracy in the United States would be the January 6th uprising, alongside of the agenda to change the rules in upcoming elections so that state congresses can determine which electors are sent, regardless of the popular vote.
Well, yeah, and so the president, the president in power, meaning Trump, can, if he wants to, reject the election outcome. I mean, his simping,
or whatever party is in power.
Well, no, it would be Trump could reject it because there wouldn't be a chance for I mean, he's demonized the Democrats. I don't mean the Republicans right now don't vote Republican because they like Republican policies. They vote Republican because the Democrats are demons. I mean, that's, this is part of the messaging. And then the other thing I was going to say was, simping over Viktor Orban and, I mean, he's, and Vladimir Putin. I mean, clearly Trump.
There's a cultural right wing, of kind of fundamentalist Christianity.
Yes,
which Trump has absolutely right. Sure. He has absolutely embraced, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know if embracing the cultural conservatism, the radical traditionalism of the fundamentalist Christians around, which would include aspects of the Catholic Church and so on. If that would qualify as fascist in the sense that Mussolini.
You're perhaps right. I mean, you may be right. I'm probably
and I would say
fascism a
that
little loosely.
I mean, and if we're concerned about nationalism and state control over the economy, I think that there's a tendency towards that overall in every party. I think that like the world
There
economy is
is.
changing,
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
not because of anybody's desire. I mean, well, just what happened with in the UK, where someone wanted to hold on to what was I've already forgotten the ex prime minister's name in the UK. Do you remember who it was? She was there for like 2 weekends. And
Sure,
then,
sure, yeah.
Yeah. Come on,
Liz
Doug.
Truss.
Yeah, Liz Truss. Thank you very much. Jesus. Yeah, I mean, she wanted to impose what kind of old style neoliberal policies in the UK,
Austerity.
and the IMF, objected because the new nationalism and I think is now kind of a global agenda.
Sure.
Enough.
I mean, it. Well, okay. Here's another way to look at it, and here's the way I tend to personally perceive these things. I mean, I very much agree, and this is why I always align myself with the left, even though I sometimes talk like I'm completely anti-left. Right? I'm really not. I'm morally find myself agreeing with the left because morally I'm committed to this idea that we need to the state or the government or the social ought to perceive the individual as being capable of this capacity for freedom, right? So from a moral perspective, I think we should look at the individual in that way. So I tend to evaluate politicians in terms of whether they seem to share that view. And I suppose I would say that I tend to see Democrats sharing that view slightly more than Republicans. Although certainly you can find plenty of counterexamples, and both parties suck. So I don't want to come across as a partisan Democrat because I'm really not.
Now I need to read up on this a little more than I have, but my understanding with Trump and his desire to overturn future presidential elections, well, there's two parts to it. First of all, I just think he's doing whatever he thinks, he's pushing for whatever he thinks would have given him the election.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah,
he's willing to subvert any law
for himself, right?
For himself,
right. But it actually is not unconstitutional, I think, for state legislatures to determine which electors are sent to vote in electoral college. Like I think that's the electoral college is designed in such a way that is a possible point of intervention. So now I say that because after Trump was elected, I was one of the people who was saying that the electors should be made to change their vote due to the fact that Trump was unfit for office and might have been under foreign influence. Like I was down with the idea that Trump was a fascist. He was a threat to the democracy. That I should be frightened and everyone should be frightened of him. And look, he did a lot to push my buttons. He looked like a little mafioso kind of taking charge.
That's what he acts like. He really does act like a mafia don, and just in the way he talks, he talks in loosely enough that you know what he means, but not specifically enough that you could come back and tie something to him in court. You know what I mean? He's it's the way it's like he talks to his bosses in a way that they know what he means, but the cops can't.
Right? Yeah. No. Right? Yeah. He speaks in not very disguised code. Just disguised enough to maybe get away with it. But anyway, I myself and parts of the Democratic Party including Keith Olbermann, were willing to overturn the popular vote and deny the election results because we didn't like them.
I say I wasn't that. I mean, I hated Trump too, but I mean, if he won, he won. We have to live with the consequences.
Right. Well, and I would say to people who told me, Doug, that's against the democracy, that's overturning an election, that will breed unrest and divide the country like nothing else could. I would say, look, it's all right there, completely constitutional. It's built into our election system that if the president has been deemed, the candidate who won is deemed to be unfit or under foreign influence, then it is a responsibility of electors to change their vote. And there is a process for this. But nonetheless, I think that was probably the wrong approach. Also, in 2000, most of the Democrats I knew completely refused to take the election results seriously, called Bush the resident in chief, and rather than the president,
Selected president.
Not our president was a slogan. It had been fixed, and not only did the Democrats say that, but the left Democrats said that. We all said it in 2000. In 2004, when Kerry lost, there was just enough of ambiguity in Ohio for people to say the same thing again. The election had been rigged. It was unfair. That Bush was a cheater. The whole system needed to be overturned. When Trump has been in office, they've been attempting in various ways to get rid of him, circumventing the vote, circumventing the will of the electorate.
Here's the thing. Let me say something about that, though. As someone who follows who has followed the various Trump soap operas, throughout his presidency, I mean, Trump really did either violate laws or violate the spirit of the law to the extent that I think any president would have been subject to the same kind of scrutiny. And
which one are you thinking of?
Well, the first one was the first impeachment over the pay to play with Ukraine. I mean, honestly, had any president been caught with that would have made any president vulnerable to either impeachment or calls for impeachment. And then
just turn it around. Imagine that that it was Hillary Clinton in office, and there was some evidence of Putin colluding with Trump to get Trump elected in 2016, but it didn't work. And there was a disinformation campaign run against Hillary Clinton, suggesting that she had peed on beds in hotels with prostitutes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she had said to Putin, if you want us to lift these sanctions, you're going to have to cooperate with an investigation into your corrupt natural gas company and give us all the information you have on on Trump and his corrupt activities in Russia. Do you think Hillary Clinton would be impeached for that? I don't think so.
I think she might have been. I mean, had she been elected president and had there been a Republican-controlled Congress, I think she might very well have been.
Okay. If there had been a Republican-controlled Congress, but the Democratic Party would look at that as an absolute violation.
They might. Yeah. Again, I'm not trying to whitewash Democrats here.
I know.
I'm saying they're slightly less awful as Republicans. The Democrats are horrendous. They're feckless. I mean, I don't know. We could go down
Spencer Leonard is here, says, I can't believe Bunch thinks the president, after having gained the mandate of the people, doesn't have the right to investigate the corruption of opposition politicians.
I didn't say that.
Well, that's how I know, but that's how he's interpreting you. And the question
What now?
is,
What
like,
did he, wait. What
let's
Spencer
go
say
back and
again?
Spencer says, I can't
The
believe
president,
John
after having
Bunch,
gained the mandate
Dr.
of people,
Mhm,
doesn't have the right to investigate the corruption of opposition. I didn't say
politician.
that.
Well, that's what the pay to play deal in Ukraine was about. But he wanted to look into I think something to do with some investigation. Basically it had to do with Hunter Biden.
No, this was when
And
he wanted. No, he wanted. Zelensky was president then of Ukraine,
Right.
right?
Right.
So he wanted Zelensky to issue a statement that would be politically beneficial domestically for Trump. And in exchange for that statement, Trump would release these promised missiles or promised weapons of some
Yeah,
sort.
but what the statement would be that he was investigating the natural gas company and some other
It
organization
was,
in
but
Ukraine
okay, it was.
around
But it
the
was
issues that had to do with Biden's participation in sitting on the board of the natural gas. Also, the fact that the former head of that natural gas company had been indicted right after then Vice President Biden's
yeah,
trip to Ukraine.
the security infrastructure, the security bureaucracy had determined that the oligarch under investigation was a bad player and yada yada yada. So
Yeah, he didn't just want a statement. He wanted Zelensky to commit to investigating corruption, which might also have gone so far as to uh, discredit a lot of the allegations around Trump's involvement with Russia, because some of the information that tended to point in that direction seemed to have been cooked up in Ukraine. I think. I mean, there was a lot at the time. It seemed delusional, but now it seems less so, given the in Russia Ukraine war. Um, that Trump would be looking to Ukraine to figure out the 2016 allegations around Russia just didn't make, to me, immediate sense. But in any case, he wanted Zelensky to investigate corruption around Biden's participation in the Ukrainian
yeah,
government, and he wanted him to make a statement to that effect. He was like, he kind of said, I want you to make that statement, and then I
it
want you
was
to do it.
the key there was in exchange for releasing weapons that Congress had already authorized. I mean,
Right,
to be
weapons, which I don't think we should have been sending, by the way.
well, okay, but that's a different issue. Whatever. I really don't want to. I don't want to. I'm not going to die on the cross of the Clinton
Die on the
Biden
hill. Die on the
axis,
hill.
right? I'm not. I mean,
the cliche is die on the hill, not die on the cross.
well,
there you're
or
showing your
die on the cross.
Reverend.
Well, I mean, I'm not
Don't
gonna die
rearrange my cliches.
I mean, I'm not going to die for the sins of the Clinton Biden.
Oh, okay,
axis,
gotcha. Now I got you now.
Right.
Right.
So,
But,
yeah. All right. Let's ask this question. How can we explain the results of tonight's election?
oh well, we don't know what they are yet.
Republicans-
Let's look and see if there's any new results. Let's make our predictions. Maybe we won't stay on long enough to actually see what happens. But what do you think? Do you think that the Republicans are going to take the Senate? Right now, it's looking less likely. The little needle has moved a little bit towards the Democrats.
Has it really?
On the New York Times website. I mean, I'm reading tea leaves here. I'm not
looking
any numbers.
I've looked at Nate Silver's stuff, Real Clear Politics. They all predict Republicans will take both House and Senate. So I'm just going to have to go with that, since that seems the most probable. But never know, anything can happen.
Well, I'm going to update the CNN, and you know what? I should look at Fox News. This shows my bias. Why don't I have Fox News open in a tab? 2024 favorite, Ron DeSantis flips deep blue Miami-Dade County.
Did he really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. This is another thing I was talking about Florida. The Democratic Party in Florida is so weak. Do you know Charlie Crist is the one who ran against DeSantis? Do you know who that is?
Not really.
Ring a bell?
No. Tell me who that is.
All right. So this is, Charlie Crist was the governor of Florida. He was Republican. All right. He got into a conflict with the Republican establishment in Florida, and he switched to Democratic Party. This was during the Obama years. Charlie Crist is a classic sleazeball, say anything, do anything for votes politician. I mean, if you look, straight out of Central Casting, if you were casting for a Hollywood movie and on the script it said sleazeball politician from Florida, there'd be a picture of Charlie Crist. I mean, just, bleach blonde hair, suntan, and so this is the guy the Democrats ran. Well, he won the Democratic primary against, I thought, we had Nikki Fried was a current Democrat. She's the agricultural commissioner, very popular Democrat. I think she's willing to challenge Democratic status quo, sued the Biden administration over its marijuana policy. She lost in the primary to Charlie Crist. And Charlie Crist, no way that guy is going to win in that. I mean, no way he's winning against a strong Republican. No way he's going to beat DeSantis. Just isn't going to happen.
But still, for him to flip Miami-Dade County, that's unusual, right?
It is unusual. But, there again, it's the Democrats. Everyone thinks Miami-Dade is supposed to be blue because it's got so many Cubans and Hispanics and so on. But that's those people. They're like everybody else. It's like they're not going to be. Just because someone's not, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant doesn't mean they're going to be a Democrat. I mean, there's just as many conservative Hispanics as there is anybody else. Well, I mean, once people get once people get established and so on, they don't,
I think that's for the best, by the way. I prefer, Catrone said this a few years ago, and when he said it, it was sort of provocative, but it really is pretty sensible. He said he wants people of various ethnicities to vote what their ideological inclinations are, rather than getting corralled
on their ethnic identity,
on their ethnic identity alone. So
totally agree.
So I want their ideological inclinations to be socialist, but it makes sense to me that especially the Democrats don't really offer anything to, let's say, middle class to working class voters.
They don't, and that's a big parts of the Democratic constituency are actually kind of socially conservative. I mean, you go to your typical like in places I've lived, Tampa and Charlotte. If you you go to in the Black communities and talk to people, most people are pretty conservative. They tend to vote Democratic just because historically Democrats are the ones who would overtly, at least since the 60s, Democrats are the ones that would overtly give at least lip service to, anti-racial discrimination things. But besides that, views on abortion, gay rights, things like that. It tends to be kind of conservative.
What do you
same way? At least, the ones I know here in Miami and so on.
Spencer Leonard says you can't talk about DeSantis without talking about COVID. What is the feeling in Miami-Dade County about the COVID lockdowns and masking and the impact of COVID on the economy?
Here's what I can say about that. The national media didn't really report Florida's COVID experience accurately. While DeSantis, issued proclamations from Tallahassee about how there would be no state mandated lockdowns, every single major city implemented lockdowns just like every other city did. Tampa, Miami, Orlando, all had lockdowns. For most of COVID, if you went anywhere in Tampa, everyone was masked, everyone social distance. You had to wear masks to go into stores. It was like everywhere else. So it's, it's a little difficult to really compare Florida and other places. But even so, the research that I've read does show that there were more COVID-related deaths in Florida than there were states with stricter lockdowns.
Well, I mean, is that my understanding is that if you compared New York to Florida or California to Florida, they're kind of, it was on par. That you probably need to think about population density as much as you do policy when it comes to looking at COVID deaths.
Yeah, the last I've read was that there was a study that came out. God dang it! It's been about 6 or 7 months that suggested there was about 20,000 additional deaths in Florida that were attributable to the lax COVID mandates.
Someone asked, what does Marxism have to offer working class LGBT people? And they left out QIST.
It's a good question. I don't. To me,
I would say state funded lubes. No,
Nasty.
No, I think that the LGBT working class people have the same thing to gain from a socialist movement as anyone else, which is the power to transform society away from the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie to a dictatorship of the working class, or the proletariat, and the transformation of the means of production, the mode of production. And, that will come along with the continued emancipation of gay and lesbian people, which capitalism itself is already producing. I mean, I would say that there's nothing in the Marxist struggle that would work against the kinds of civil liberties and personal freedoms that have already been gained in liberal democracies, are being, there's still a struggle to maintain them, but there's certainly nothing counter the interest of the LGBT community. I know historically the Communist Party has not always been, on the forefront of protecting gay rights, and the radical organizations have limited memberships into the organization based on discriminating against gay people in the 20th century. That happened. But there's nothing about Marxism that necessitates that is. So someone says, nice quote, Mr. Lain. I assume they're saying. So Vanilla Ice said in the 80s, gay rights, give them free Vaseline. Yeah, it's my smart ass response. By the way, free lube would not just be for LGBT.
Yeah, that'd be
people.
That's
everyone could participate in the socialist
in the lube party. Sure,
especially if you're over the age of 45 or so. You need that stuff. So anyhow,
so
the October Revolution legalized homosexuality, as Spencer Leonard says.
Well, what does Marxism have to do, if anything? What does socialism have to do, if anything, with gay rights and transgender rights and whatnot?
What does socialism have to do with gay rights and transgender rights?
Yeah, with LGBTQ and so on rights.
It's the same answer to that as like, why did Marx advocate for the right to vote or in the right to organize politically? That the struggle for socialism necessitates the expansion of the power of civil society and the freedom within civil society. So that's why the struggle for socialism comes along with an expansion of civil liberties and freedom and protection for all different kinds of people.
Because inside the individual, we have this awareness of freedom, which might mean freedom from social constrictions on gender expression. And
well, I mean, look, if you have social constrictions on gender expression, that's a power in the hand of the bourgeoisie to oppress people who you want to be organizing for collective as well as individuals liberation. I mean, you want to take the power of the capitalist class and the power of the bourgeois state away and put it in the power and that power in the hands of civil society, of everyday people, of working class people to organize for themselves, for their own interests. And so that means you would be wanting to get rid of laws that that discriminated cruelly and unnecessarily and against people of gay people or people of all sorts of minority positions.
So could there be a kind of proletariat class consciousness without a respect for LGBT rights?
Could there be a proletariat class consciousness without respect for LGBT rights? Absolutely, there could be a proletariat class consciousness. You could, and a kind of a workerist consciousness. You could have a proletariat consciousness that doesn't respect the rights of immigrant labor, or that goes to war for the bourgeoisie of its own nation.
That's sort of a national socialist. That's starting to. That would be.
I mean, like,
Nazis, right?
There's nothing about being working class that provides you with some special consciousness. It's only when working people decide to organize politically together in the name of socialism, and work out what their collective freedom would look like, that these things become necessary. So I don't believe there could be any struggle for socialism that didn't also include freedom for LGBT people. But I do think that there can be a consciousness in a proletarian person that is, can be as mixed up as anyone else, basically, is what I would say.
All right. Yeah. The point I was making was, I mean, again, to me, you're seeing the proletariat tonight vote Republican. And clearly, there's, I mean, if there's any concern for LGBTQ rights, it's on the back burner.
Oh, in the voting public?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's clear to me that the way in which the trans debate has shaken out is it has done nothing but alienate everybody. And
no, it's nuts. It's gotten a little nuts. I mean, to me, see, here, I'll throw this at you. Here's another kind of hot take, right? Maybe it'll generate some controversy. So, yeah, again, back to that idea that, at the heart of center to leftism, center of left of centrism, I guess maybe we can say, is this idea again of this individual needing emancipation from the various oppressions applied by capitalism and so on and so forth. So that really, becomes salient when we think about the kind of left bourgeois conceptualization we have now of transgenderism as a phenomenon, right? People will die on a cross to argue that trans women are women, trans men are men, right? There people on the left will die on that cross rather than anything having to do with material workers' rights, et cetera, and I think that unless someone shares that vision of the individual in need of radical emancipation, the sort of the willingness of so many on the left to hang themselves, to put themselves on that cross of cross transgender. That's not right, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, what you're saying is that it becomes a litmus test.
It does.
If you have the right attitude or
for membership,
the right ideological stance on trans issues.
For
I think it's a really dumb.
test of morality.
Like, obviously, when someone says that trans man is not a real man, well, the first thing I think when someone says that is, I know what it's like to not be a real man, and so I completely embrace my fellow trans man in that failure. But the other thing I think is that obviously people are talking across purposes. There's, and I know this is for some people this is considered a shitty take, but there's biological sex and there's gender expression, right? And when a trans man insists on being treated as a man, they are requesting, I think justifiably, that you treat them as their gender expression would have you treat them, without asking for a chromosome test or inspecting their genitals or what have you. And I think that is, completely justified. And that's it. That's as far as I take it. I'm not going to sit around and debate, just what counts as biological sex or what counts as gender expression either. Like, there's a again, pointing to myself, I think I expressed myself remotely like within the category broadly of like a man would. And that I would like to be treated as a man, despite the fact that I know by many people's standards, I fall well short of that standard. So I want to bring up this comment here. Someone says, as a gay working class man, I recognize that capitalism keeps us divided. However, I am frustrated by the hostility the left frequently has for my community.
Give us an example of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if there's, I question how much hostility the gay community receives from the left today. But, I live in Portland, Oregon. So who knows what's going on in the left in other parts of this country or around the world. But there is certainly no reason for the socialist left to be at all hostile to the to people who are gay organizing for their own rights.
Sure, no, I totally agree with that. But I don't see the need. I mean, to me, it doesn't. I'm not sure. It's sort of an artifact of history that we associate. I think in some, to some extent, we associate gay rights with political liberalism or left of center politics, just because, I could see the Republican Party or a conservative party being welcoming to conservative gay people. That to me is a shift that could be made. And there doesn't seem to me that a sexual orientation necessarily has anything to do with political ideology. What you're saying about transgender, though, here's the thing. I mean, I totally agree. We don't really know why someone experiences the phenomenon of transgender. I
don't actually really care.
Well, I don't either. That's the thing. I think conservatives are a little too focused on it. They're a little bit too sensitive to the fact that, somebody else out there wants to express their gender in a novel way or whatever, right? Conservatives are a little too focused on it. And I think, I think that shows the sort of the conservative unconscious preoccupation with anxiety over sexuality. However, right at the same time, I also agree that I don't really care why someone wants, if someone feels that they would be happier in society by presenting themselves in a way that's not, not socially expected, related to sexuality and so on, then fine. They have every right in the world to do that. It would be impolite to, if they want to be called by a particular pronoun. I mean, common decency would say, fine, I'll call you by that pronoun. I don't necessarily need to know why, right? I mean, maybe it's genetic, maybe it was early childhood learning. Maybe it was a combination of two. Maybe they just had a dream one night and woke up one morning. It really doesn't make any difference. If it's a genuine, sincere feeling they have, then, you know, it would be inhumane to not, you know, have some degree of respect for that.
I remember listening to a podcast a few years, maybe 2 years ago, where a comedian performance artist came on, and at the time he was a he again, and he had lived as a woman for a couple of years because he wanted to. And you know, I don't know how convincing or whether he passed as a woman or not during that time, but he lived as a woman, changed his name to a woman's name, requested people use feminine pronouns. And then when he was tired of living as a woman, he returned to being a man. I feel as though when he was living as a woman, he should have been treated with the respect that he deserved, meaning people should have called him her and referred to him by his female name, and, you know, opened the door for him and talked over him as much as possible, just like a woman. And then when he became a man, you know, all that would change. Come on, John, call me out on this. Anyhow, the point is,
well, I mean,
catch my joke. The point is, you're not supposed to talk over women. It's wrong. But no, the point is, the gender expression doesn't have to be rooted in biology or your soul, or it's your freedom.
Yeah, right. I totally agree with that, right? But there are certainly people on the left who will want to fight you if you dare question whether trans women are women. You know,
people are in the chat debating each other quite a lot about this. And we've got someone saying that there were cross-dressing Nazis, someone else complaining that gender is a conceptual tool used by feminists against straight white men. Now they're turning it against each other.
That. I mean, okay, I'll tell you, I kind of have almost, to some degree, Judith Butler type perspective on gender, and that I agree with her that it is performative, right? I mean, you have this biological sex, and people are going to say, well, what about people who are born with both sex organs or neither sex organ? I mean, sure, we're talking about, you know, a biological attribute. So certainly there are counterexamples, but that, you know, to say that biological sex doesn't exist or it's not a binary is like saying left-handed and right-handed people don't exist because there's ambidextrous people, right? So you've got this biological binary sex. Gender is how we sort of perform that in society, right? And I mean, that you could, there's no limit to the ways you could perform that.
I want you to know,
gender, right? So gender could be anything. I mean, gender doesn't have to be binary. Gender could be whatever. But, you know.
As we discuss the trans issue further, two things are happening. The number of viewers are declining a little bit, but also, more importantly, the needle is swinging towards the Democrats.
Is it really?
Holding on to the Senate just a little bit. Now that needle, it's the New York Times front page. Hardly a reliable indicator, but it is the one I have at the moment. And while the Senate is still a toss-up, it has moved. The needle has moved to the left, towards the Democrats, and even as the House is leaning more and more Republican. So I just thought I'd
interesting
throw that out there.
Interesting.
Someone says, I think what Doug and John are getting at is that there's no compelling Marxist reason to advocate for gay people. It's an ethical thing to do, but outside the wheelhouse of economics. Yeah, that's not even quite right. I think there's a Marxist reason to protect people's freedoms, as, you know, to have a private sexual life and to have the, you know, relationships they want, and to that comes along with the right to organize freely in general. Like you want to limit the amount of power the state can have to dictate to the civil society or to regular people, and therefore the struggle for gay rights is a part of the struggle for socialism. It is not separate. It's not maybe the only part, or even necessarily always the leading struggle, but it is certainly a part of the struggle, and it should just be reflexive to advocate for gay rights and to advocate for the rights of ethnic minorities and the rights of immigrant labor and so forth, because the aim is to unite everyone and to protect everyone's freedom so that they can act to change society.
I know some people are saying
you can easily use Marxism to attempt to enforce heteronormativity. You need your workers breeding to increase worker output, so force them if you're a Stalinist state.
True.
That's not, yeah, but Stalinism was state capitalism.
Well, true. That's true too. Well, it's hard to, for me, I have a hard time understanding what a Marxist government would actually look like, other than it just wouldn't be capitalist and would have something to do with a democratic workplace.
Yeah, it would have the dictatorship of the proletariat, which would be a kind of democracy, kind of counterintuitively, would change the way work was done and the aims of production dramatically, and that's what socialism is. And then the questions about like how do we get political power? What's the role of the party? What kind of transitionary period would there be? Those are debates within socialism that need to be had. And the question of a transitional society is the question that justified Stalinism for a time, but just when understood theoretically, the socialism is not the imposition of state control over
the individual,
capitalist production, or over the individual. Right.
Sure. That's the opposite of what we would hope for it to be. Sure. I'm looking, there's 5 states voting on marijuana legalization, which is another issue the Democrats, to me, absolutely dropped the ball on.
Well, you can see why, though, because the people who really want that to get passed probably don't get it together to actually vote.
Yeah. Well, honestly, though, this is something that the war on drugs is among the most egregious of oppressive government projects of the 20th century that was orchestrated, or at least was championed primarily by conservative Republicans, although Democrats such as Joe Biden jumped on board. But nonetheless, that ought to be an issue the Democrats could get some leverage on, but they just won't touch it. Really, Biden puts out 2 or 3 weeks ago, he put out a proclamation that maybe he'll have the FDA reschedule it, or DEA, whoever schedules, FDA, I guess, may reschedule it at some point. But, you especially look at an issue that cuts across or has touches on race and racial inequality so extensively. But, where are the Democrats on that? They're nowhere.
What do you think it is that's holding back the push to legalize marijuana? In Oregon, we've had legalized marijuana for a while.
Couple of things. I followed this. I have a sort of a personal history of being involved. This may be hard to believe.
No, I'm shocked.
In the marijuana legalization effort.
No, really.
Since the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I went out to California in the early 90s, talked to, I worked with a group in Florida in the early 90s that was looking at marijuana legalization things in Florida then. So I went out to California. I met Scott Emler. This is before Prop 215. And I went into the Scott Imler's West Hollywood dispensary, Dennis Peron's San Francisco dispensary, and this is before Prop 215. Those were the only two legally they weren't legally operating, but they were two biggest dispensaries in California at the time. And Imler and Peron were two of the big proponents of Prop 215. So I went out and talked to them about it, and then came back and worked with Florida for a while, and just followed, how things happened in Florida. And, you've got, on the one hand, it's the reason, the war on drugs, looking back on it, the war on drugs is absurd. The war on marijuana is absurd. And it stands on a house of cards, a sort of logical house of cards. But so many people have, so many constituencies benefit from the prohibition. Alcohol companies, you've got prison industry, you've got politicians who can make the argument that, I'm protecting you from these dangerous drugs and these terrible people that use the drugs. And so the war on drugs has worked so well for so many people that I think all major, constituencies of it are reticent to give it up. You've still got conservative. Matter of fact, about 2 years ago, I went up to Tallahassee and spoke to the Florida legislature. They were debating something about Florida's medical marijuana bill, or medical marijuana laws. And I talked to some of the politicians there, right? And they just don't care. These conservative politicians know that they can get brownie points, that they can stoke the outrage of their conservative constituency by talking about how bad marijuana is. They associate it with minorities, white liberals. So, it's to their benefit for it to be illegal, because as long as it's illegal, then these conservative politicians are fighting the bad guys. They're helping put these minorities and white liberals in jail. These marijuana users are putting them in jail, right? So there's just a lot of players who have too much to gain. And then when in Florida, when the state when the voters passed the medical marijuana amendment to the state constitution, the legislature, created this insane, just absurd system for implementing it, where they sold these vertical licenses to the highest bidder. You had politicians, family members creating companies to buy these licenses. They could, be part of this oligarchical marijuana industry. It's, so it's pure, there's just so many people that benefit on all sides of the war on drugs. It's going to be slow to change. But clearly, to me, it is an area where the Democrats absolutely dropped the ball. Absolutely, have shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah. What's the polling like on this? Is it do independents say care about this issue?
Yeah, they do. Anytime it's asked in polls, even among Republicans, most people favor legalization, right? And whenever it's put up to a vote somewhere, almost always it passes. So it's expected to pass. And okay, there's 5 states. I made some notes about this earlier. There's 5 states that's on the ballot today: Arkansas, Missouri, Maryland, North Dakota, South Dakota. Now, a couple of these things are interesting. Arkansas may not win because the pro-marijuana industry is opposed to the law. I shouldn't say the industry. A lot of the pro-marijuana activists are opposed to the law, because the law in Arkansas is kind of like the one in Florida. in that it creates a very strict state-controlled industry that will greatly benefit a small number of high-dollar national and international marijuana consumers. Like Florida has what you could call a marijuana cartel, right? We've got like Tikkun and some of the big Israeli companies. We've got the big national companies all operating here. But to play in the Florida market, which is like one of the biggest in the country, you've got to buy a license, which can cost up to $150 million. So it's only going to be, you know, the biggest companies that can set up operations here. Arkansas is trying to put something in place like that, and it may not pass because of it. Missouri, recreational cannabis for 21 and over, expunge past records. Maryland, same thing or similar. North Dakota, not quite as loose, but a little bit up. They allow up to an ounce. South Dakota, in 2020, South Dakota voters passed a marijuana resolution, but the conservative state legislature and courts shot it down. So they're having a do-over. So South Dakota is re-voting on a 2020 measure. All 5 of those, with the exception of possibly Arkansas, expected to vote for it. And again, the Arkansas one's kind of weird. So,
well, it will be interesting to see because if those are red states, North Dakota and South Dakota, apparently at the moment, and how did they vote in the last election in 2020? Did they go for Trump? Was that Trump territory?
Arkansas, Missouri, North Dakota, South Dakota. I'm pretty sure those were all red. Maryland,
right.
I think, was blue.
So, I mean, it would be good, or at least interesting, if they passed marijuana legalization in these red states. Because someone in the chat said, has there been any red states that have passed this yet? And frankly,
Virginia.
I don't. Virginia, right.
And I mean, Florida's pretty red. Florida's, I think, kind of purple. I think it's red right now, but Florida could go back. But whatever. Florida's got, it's got a pretty extensive medical system, not full recreational. But I mean, you know, it's easy to go get a medical card, and you know, you go to a dispensary and they've got all the same stuff you'd get.
Do they? I bet they don't at the medical dispensary have the same stuff you would get here in Oregon if you went.
It's similar. It's similar.
How many different names do they have for the same bud? Is what I want to know.
You've got, you know, at any given time, you've got
this one will make you feel lightheaded and giddy. This one,
they got all that shit. They got all that marketing. There's 100 different strains, and each one's got a breakdown by CDB content, THC, and
none of those people. When I went in, like twice to buy some marijuana once it was legal. And the first time that no one told me the truth, which is that it will make you feel paranoid, nostalgic, and old. Nobody told me that. So like I was going, I remember the last time I did this, I was 22. And then I just start crying. It's not good. It was not good. It's not what I need in my life.
Now, see, Florida's is, honestly, Florida's is, and you got to have money. You have to have a little money. You know, it's going to cost you about $150 a year to maintain the legal status. The cost of marijuana has come down as the number of dispensaries has increased. The price has come down. It's now fairly competitive with other states. Not as cheap as Colorado. It's competitive with what I remember Oregon being last time I was out there. You know, so, and then every state's got some weird laws though. Like, which one is it? Isn't it Washington that can't sell edibles or something like that?
I don't know.
Or maybe it's I can't remember. There's some weird.
You can get edibles in Oregon.
Okay.
So just back to the overall map. I don't know if we've announced this already, but JD Vance is projected to win.
Oh, is he?
90%,
okay.
90% of the votes in Ohio. That's noteworthy. The needle on front page of the New York Times still saying the Senate is a toss-up, kind of moves just ever so gently to the right and then to the left again. The House looks like to be leaning Republican, but not as much as it was about 20 minutes ago.
Huh.
Right now I would say it's very likely the House will go to the Republicans. And, I would flip a coin on the Senate. I guess I wonder what state. I mean, if I was a real political pundit, I would know what state we should be looking towards, what we should be really watching closely to discover. When we'll know that whether or not it's going to go to the Republicans or not. I guess Pennsylvania is one that's close. We should watch. Oz is within spitting distance of Fetterman there.
That might be a little different though, just because of the Fetterman, health problems and the stroke and so on. That might.
It doesn't matter why the Republicans win back. The Senate. It just matters that they do or they don't.
Yeah.
And that would be. It obviously would not be indicating some huge ideological shift if Fetterman lost, right? But did you watch any of the debate between
a little
Oz
bit
and
of
Fetterman?
it?
We got.
It was.
Kubak,
it's. I don't know, man. That's Oz is pretty horrendous, but I mean,
yeah. Well, it's one of those things where if you don't know the players very well, you just watch a clip, it seems pretty clear that Fetterman might not be in the best condition to take office. Brian Bortz says, I'm feeling paranoid, nostalgic, and old right now. I wonder if that means that he's high.
Here, speaking of.
Oh yeah. I'm been using my nicotine vape.
See, I gave up cigarettes years ago. I was never a hardcore cigarette smoker. My wife was. Here's a story. Here's a cigarette story for you.
Okay, cigarette story time. I wish we had like some sort of intro I could run for cigarettes.
Yeah. So my wife was a hardcore smoker. Her parents were smokers. Grew up in a smoking house. So she started smoking when she was, 15 or something. So we lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. That was during the Jesse Helms era. So, cigarettes at that time in North Carolina, cigarettes were the cash crop. So they weren't bad for you. Right. My high school had a smoking patio.
Oh, wow. Funny? That is funny.
So anyway,
was it for and the students were allowed to use it?
Yeah, absolutely. We had it was an old high school built around a quadrangle, so in the center, his buildings built around a square. That center part was called the smoking patio, and that's where you go smoke. So anyway, so she was a hardcore smoker, right? So grew up smoking, hardcore pack-a-day smoker. Smoked a pack and a half Marlboro Light 100s. So when I was in graduate school, I took this behavioral psychology class, and we had to get a client or patient and apply behavioral analysis to change some behavior. And I was working at a local mental health center, so I could have gotten like someone with a mental health issue of some sort, but professor let me do my wife and let her to get her to stop smoking. So I put her on the smoking cessation program. So what we had to do was she had to write down every time she smoked a cigarette, what time it was, where she was, and then she had to we created this system where if she'd have daily goals, weekly goals for the number of cigarettes she'd smoke, and if she didn't meet those goals, she had to some punishments, like she had to write a letter before she started. She had to write a letter to Jesse Helms and tell him how much she appreciated his efforts to keep women out of the workplace. She wanted to be subservient to her husband, and she had to include a cash donation to his campaign. Put it in a letter, stamp it, address it, and put it by the door, right? So she had to have 3 or 4 of those letters, right, to different people. But if she met the goal, then she would get a reward. She'd like get that cash and she could spend it on anything she wanted.
Except for
Different things like
cigarettes.
that. And it worked.
Yeah.
It took 30 days. But after 30 days, she quit and she's not smoked a cigarette since.
What do you think about vaping as an alternative to smoking cigarettes?
It seems, I'm not a physician. It seems to me that vaping can't possibly be as bad for you as smoking cigarettes. So it seems like vaping would be better, but I mean, maybe it may have some health problems too. I don't really know.
Yeah.
Really
it apparently has like 95% less toxins than cigarettes, doesn't do damage to your heart, blah blah blah. I've had these arguments, and I vape and I do not smoke cigarettes, so
it's got to be better than smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Vaping
I definitely I can tell the difference. I can
yeah.
So that's, I'm sure, what everyone wants to know. As looks like with 0% of the votes counted, the liberal New York Times is reporting California going to Alex Padilla.
Yeah.
Not a big shock there. And yeah, so we've been doing this for about 2 hours. I'm gonna put it to a vote in the comments. See how many people are wanting to stick around for more talk as the night wears on, or someone says maybe because you're not cool, Doug, because that's why I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm assuming
that's probably right.
No, I used to be cool. There was like 2 weeks in like 1992. I was a cool guy.
I smoked Marlboro Reds.
Did you?
Good cigarette.
So anyway, so do people? I'm going to give it 5 minutes here. People want us to continue, or do you want to go tune into CNN, Fox, or I guess you could. Breaking Point has a live stream going.
Yes, yeah, they do. I noticed that.
And I would imagine that they will have many more detailed political coverage, moments of actual analysis of the election itself than we have here. But they also are just looking at the New York Times front page.
Everybody's reading the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like Lippmann describing the wire service of his day. It's just a few people out there telling everybody else what's happening and everybody else reacting to it.
I'll tell you what, let's keep going. Someone's got a couple votes in. People say keep going. Let's go for another half an hour and then wrap it up. Here's a question for you. I'm going to quote my own tweet from earlier today, which I'm scraping. But I tweeted, with Nathan Silver projecting Republicans to win the House and Senate, I feel it. A blood transfusion for the quote left. It's about time. If only Trump would announce his candidacy.
Well, that's supposed to happen next week, right?
Yeah, right. It's going to happen pretty soon, I think. But what do you think? If the Republicans manage to take back the House and the Senate, do you think that we'll see an uptick in interest in organizations like the DSA and magazines like Jacobin? And hell, why not? Magazines like Sublation Magazine. And someone's asking, is Trump running or DeSantis? They'll both be running, I'm sure.
That's a good question. That's yet to be. The Trump versus DeSantis showdown appears to be coming, so that's going to be interesting.
I guess, yeah. It will be, because I don't know who will win that showdown. I assume that Trump has some momentum still, but
it's hard to say.
Just an assumption on my part.
Yeah.
And it will happen state by state, so who knows. But from my point of view, the question is it's cynically asked, right? Because obviously, if the quote left gets a bump because the Republicans have power, and that will mean that the energy of the Democratic Party there's enough energy for the Democrat as an opposition party to spare to give to the so-called left. Like that. Though I think the left is called upon when the Democrats are out of power to be the bleeding edge of the opposition, the left opposition in America.
I agree with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, the Democrat, and I'm not. I don't. Someone made a comment about not associating Democrats with the left, and they're right.
Yeah.
Certainly, but I don't think there is any coherent left. So I don't know. I mean, you're right in that. There should be some kind of coherent opposition, and people would be looking to it, but there's not one. There just isn't one. I mean, the right currently makes, as well as always, makes a very straightforward and simple argument or proposition, and that is, we represent control. We represent hierarchy, structure, and if you put your faith in us, we promise a material return. Democrats don't have anything like that.
Well, I just know that after Trump was elected, the DSA got a massive infusion of members. The term socialism became much more popular than it ever had been. And there was a little rising industry of online media pundits that emerged after 2016. I think Chapo Trap House grew tremendously after Trump was elected. But it was growing not just based on opposition to Trump, but opposition to the neoliberal Clintonite opposition to Trump.
I think certainly there's a market, a void that needs to be filled. So I think if new voices that would potentially fall on the left could have something new to say, then there's certainly a market for that. If someone can put together a coherent model of the left, then certainly there's a market for it and people would be looking for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. The question for me is why can't, what I would prefer to have happen is for a left to emerge directly in opposition to the Democratic Party, rather than as the bleeding edge of the Democratic Party's opposition to the Republicans. That, if there was a moment for an actual socialist left to step forward and soak up energy in opposition, that moment probably was after the failure of the Sanders campaign in 2020, because there should have been, and there was, a lot of disenchantment with the Sanders campaign and with the DSA and with the visible left that had rallied around Sanders. I mean, and I don't exclude myself there. I mean, while I offered critical support of the DSA turn, nonetheless, it was a kind of support, and that moment seems to have passed now. We actually, after tonight, it will have passed if the Republicans take the Senate and the House, because now whatever the millennials and the upcoming Zoomers and the old Gen Xers who are define themselves as part of the left do, it will be done against a U.S. state that is at least half dominated by the Republican Party.
Yeah. Have you read Alexander Dugin?
No, a bit. What do you think of Dugin?
I've been watching what's his name, Miller's videos, Miller's series of videos on Dugin, and reading some Dugin. I think it seems to me that there is emerging this kind of consensus well, I don't, maybe not consensus isn't the right word, but there's emerging this idea, growing idea that, we've moved into a post-left period, a post-fascist period, and a post-liberal capitalist period, right? He's got his book, the one what I'm reading is called the fourth. What's it called?
Yeah.
Fourth.
The fourth way or something like that.
Yeah. So it's an argument that we've just moved past.
The fourth political theory is what it's
Fourth
called.
political theory.
Yeah,
So
and
we've
I have
moved
a PDF of this book. You know what? It used to be available on Amazon, but no
past. I think
longer
it still is. I think I bought it on
No.
Amazon.
When did you do that?
I can't remember. It could have been a while ago.
Because I believe since the war in Ukraine,
I think it's in my Kindle.
yeah, I just don't find it when I type in The Fourth Political Theory by Alexander Dugin. And I think it has been taken down. I think he is being censored in the West now.
Interesting. He's on YouTube.
No, he's on YouTube. Yeah,
Got some extensive.
but
videos.
he doesn't run his own YouTube channel.
No. But
I mean,
there are videos of him.
Yeah, but they took Alex Jones down. All of his.
Yeah, true.
But I could still interview Alex Jones if he would dare to come on, and I will not be thrown off because I'm giving a platform to someone that they won't give a platform.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know. Dugin overall, he seems a little too enamored with the idea of nationalism, and I don't.
Dugin's a right-wing traditionalist.
He is, and I don't know. He never. I'm always left needing some rationale for that. He sort of starts with these assumptions of nationalist interest and so on, and for me, I would need more explanation of where that comes from. But the part of him that I think is kind of compelling is I think he's right in that, the 20th century, I think that we have to put communism, fascism, and liberal democracy are really products of the 20th century. And there does seem to be a desire or a propensity to move beyond those where we are now in the 21st century. I don't know that, certainly, liberal democracy works to the extent that it hasn't collapsed, that, there's not been a social collapse, but it certainly doesn't work to the extent that it promises to work, right? So
I think Dugin should be taken up and treated as a serious philosopher, because I think that's the best way to discredit him. Just like with Jordan Peterson.
Well, Dugin and Peterson, two totally different leagues, not in the same league.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I think Dugin is maybe a bit more skilled at deploying rhetoric than Peterson. What I like about Jordan Peterson is he's utterly sincere. Like he actually says what he means.
Peterson has this fantastical. I mean, his entire conceptualization of Marx is post World War II anti-Soviet propaganda.
Right.
So, but Dugin doesn't have anything like that. I mean, Dugin just flat out says. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Dugin doesn't have any sort of
Dugin treats Marxism
invented intellectual bullshit
as a cultural ideology. Dugin treats Marxism as if it's can be separated out from liberal democracy, and it can't be really. He treats it as an idea of cultural ideology. He treats all of these political forces as if they're independent of the political economy. First and foremost, so as if you're really making a big choice when you decide whether or not you're going to be in a liberal democracy or some state-run economy. So there's that. But I mean, the main thing that I would say is that Dugin plays this game where he equates, old traditional forms of society with post-structuralist
Oh yeah, that
You
yeah.
know, he is very smart man, probably rhetorically gifted, perhaps, but completely unserious when it comes to the way his argumentation, and from what I've seen, um, he's a hack.
So
And
I wouldn't classify him as a hack. I don't agree with him, but I wouldn't call him a hack.
okay,
I mean,
fair
I
enough.
think he makes some fairly compelling arguments.
I just anyone who doesn't understand the connection between liberal modernity or liberalism and post-structuralism, who thinks that they can be separated out. Doesn't see the post-structuralist anti-meta narrative, uh, uh, you know, perspective as an expression of bourgeois liberal modernity, then is either miseducated in a way that I don't understand, or just playing games. Because the kind of you can't take up Deleuze or even Heidegger and not take up modernity at the same time. You're not
He
escaping.
does deal with modernity, but he sees it as more of a what I mean, sort of, I don't know, I almost want to say a evolutionary phase or something. That he wants to react to in a certain way. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we should do like a more methodical and rather than just a bunch of hot takes.
Yeah.
Approach to do again. You and I.
Yeah.
I mean, we should read.
He
Both got this. The fourth political theory book. We should do a couple podcasts on it, or a series.
We should. Something I've been researching on YouTube is right-wing philosophy, and there's a lot of it on YouTube. There's a lot of work on Julius Evola.
Yeah, I know.
It's not necessarily done by right-wingers, but there are some really good channels that dive into right-wing philosophy.
I like Evola. I mean, here, take this out of context, everybody. I like Evola, but no, I respect people who are embracing Evola because he was a mystic, and he was
yeah.
He was straightforwardly religious, and as such, to take him up, you have to put your presuppositions on the table. You have to admit that you're making a leap of faith, that there's a streak of irrationality in your thinking that you embrace. And so anyway, I from what I know, that if you're doing that, then maybe you might create something interesting in terms of art or something. But it obviously I wouldn't embrace Julius Evola. I just want to, if you're gonna take that clip where I said I liked him, you have to put that last.
Sure. I think to me though, the positive thing that comes from sort of making a study of Evola, and
they have a vaccine against Evola now. I think we may be mispronouncing his name.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that a lot of he repeats a lot of the ideas of previous conservative writers, previous right-wing writers, and those ideas just repeat themselves over time. By studying people like Evola, you understand why and how those same ideas appeared in today's political context. I mean, I think you've got, and you understand it. It helps you clarify exactly why you believe what you believe, and you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, definitely, it's worth studying. And that is one of the from like 2014 until 2020. The right wing, and it's probably even now, but I think it's becoming less and less the case. The conservatives in America could make a lot of hay out of the fact that the left was trying to remain ideologically pure by not engaging with their political enemies' ideas. And
Still does.
Someone says, "I love Ebola." Doug Lain, got it. God damn it. Yeah, and so but that is, that is a sign of, obviously, a sign of intellectual weakness. It's a losing strategy. You're never going to be ideologically pure, because you're going to be influenced by, hopefully you're influenced by a myriad of sources. And I just think that you should not discount someone based on them having read and then announced on a live stream that they love Julia Savola. I think that's not,
yeah, true.
I want to look at the New York Times again. Let's see if there are any new developments. Looks like it's likely Patty Murray in Washington is winning the Senate. Ron Wyden is looking good in Oregon right now. I've met Ron Wyden. He seems like an okay guy. You can take that too. Put that next to the Julia Savola thing and ruin both our reputations. Mark Kelly in Arizona is a toss-up, though, according to the New York Times. But Mike Lee in Utah is very likely to win, the Republican. And the needle is not really moving very much as far as the Senate goes. It's still leaning.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too. It's
leaning Democrat, actually,
yeah.
but it's still a toss-up in the liberal New York Times. CNN says several key contests are too close to call, including Georgia and Pennsylvania. Republicans only need one additional seat to take control. And so we should be watching Georgia and Pennsylvania. And right now in Pennsylvania, see if I can, let's see if I can get some information on that. Like what percent of the
Fetterman looks like he's ahead with 93, 27% or 73%.
74% reporting right now in Pennsylvania.
And Fetterman's over a point and a half ahead.
Yeah.
Squeeze that one out.
So, oh no, the New York Times is down. Okay, they're up again. I don't know. Yeah, that's fairly close, but yeah, he's like almost 2 points ahead. 74% of the votes in.
Huh.
The question in Pennsylvania is, what are we waiting for? What precincts are we waiting for? And
where's Philadelphia?
And how much of the votes have already been banked from mail-in ballots? I mean, how much of this is how many Republicans have been counted at this point is sort of the question of the remaining 26% of the vote. Who are they? And we don't know. So, but if Fetterman wins, then it will come down to Georgia, where it looks like Walker is it's neck and neck. It's like 1,000 vote difference.
Jesus,
with Walker ahead. 86% of the votes in. My prediction is worthless, but I'm going to say Georgia goes to Walker, and I'm going to say,
man, usually the like Atlanta and the high density areas that are last to report, and that'll probably go Warnock. I don't know. That's hard. That's tough, man. I don't know. I wouldn't want to call that one yet.
There's been a lot of controversy around Walker, right? I mean,
yes, because he's adamantly anti-abortion, yet turns out he's paid several women to have abortions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just classic, it's classic right-wing Republican nonsense.
I want to say that NBC News, they said that Vance has won Ohio, but we covered it here first, because that's the kind of intrepid newsmakers we are.
That's true.
Because I clicked on the map on the New York Times and saw how many votes have been counted, and said, it looks like Vance is winning Ohio, and he did. Of course, with 93% of the votes are in. Vance, he's the author of Hillbilly Elegy. Is that right?
Yes.
You read that book?
No, I'm not going to read it just because there's been I have a personal, since I am an ethnic hillbilly, I have a
You feel like you would be triggered by this book?
I feel like I may be triggered by it, and I just, so I've purposely not read it.
Well, I am not. Well, maybe I am. I mean, I was born in Memphis. I don't
Yeah, but
come across that way. But
well, I lost I had to learn to lose the accent, but I bet your uncle didn't go possum hunting.
I was taken snipe hunting as a kid by my uncle in Oak Ridge. You know what that is?
Yeah.
He'd love to take me out to hunt the snipes. I almost caught one once, I swear to God.
Yeah, no possum hunting, right? So
I know that possum, unlike the snipe, is a real animal.
Yes. So people would say, because there's nothing you can do with a possum, right? I mean, you got to be really poor and hungry to eat one. People eat them, and people in my family, my granddad used to eat them.
There's another reason to kill possom.
Because
if you're raising, if you're raising chickens, if you have chickens,
yeah. So my uncle would say, people would say, why do you hunt those possums? So because they're so damn ugly. That's the reason he'd give.
Mm-hmm. They are too.
Anyway, but yeah, they were Western North Carolina. Anyway, so yeah, hillbilly. So I'm not going to read that. Not going to read it. I might get triggered by it.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But I think that did him a world of good to have written that book. Number one, New York Times bestseller, major motion picture, directed by Ron Howard.
That's right.
Starring Glenn Close as a hillbilly.
Okay, here's what I was going to ask. Here's the question.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that you notice in both the writings of Evola and Dugan,
mm-hmm.
and that is the idea that a lot of people simply don't like, are not comfortable, and reject liberalism. Right? I mean, there are a lot of people who seem to take comfort in understanding and knowing their place in the hierarchy, in in perceiving the world as in terms of a hierarchical structure in which everyone has a place, and which they have a place, and in which there's a sort of a natural order that some people are lower or higher than others. And I think they're right. How does the left respond to that? In other words, it seems to me that on the left, you're left making a very tenuous claim that no, in fact, people do strive for freedom. It's just being masked or oppressed or whatever by capitalism.
Well, okay. First of all, the ways in which people hate liberalism, there's a full range. A lot of Marxists would say they hate liberalism, right?
True, but for different reasons.
Yeah, totally different reasons. So I'll just start there. But then the question of, is it the case that it's just, the human nature to crave the security of submission to authority, that the embrace of hierarchies is sort of built into the human brain. Just like Chomsky would say that there's that we are language making animals, that we're genetically predisposed to speak and understand and think through language. And you would argue, well, we are also genetically predisposed to, at least a good percentage of us, to crave and seek a station within a hierarchy. Right.
I wouldn't necessarily say everyone is, but because there's lots of individual difference, but many people are. I would make that argument.
And that's Peterson says something similar, right? That's the whole thing about lobsters, right? Is that
Yes, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that uh, just as there might be a universal grammar or that is genetically determined, and yet there also can be a massive amount, maybe an unmeasurable amount of innovation and freedom within the realm of language. That the same holds with the need for hierarchy. I mean, you can create all sorts of social organizations that hinge upon hierarchies without those hierarchies dominating the basis of society. And like, as an example, used to be arguments amongst the anarchists that I would hang with or read, really, about whether or not symphony orchestras needed to be overturned because of the role of a conductor. Right? In a communist anarchist society, art forms like the symphony orchestra persist? And my perspective now is that absolutely that people could freely choose to participate in creating art in a very hierarchical, structured, traditional way, and that need for hierarchy might even be served through their participation and a very disciplined organization that aimed at creating high art, right? And that doesn't mean that that hierarchy has to dominate every aspect of the decision making that goes on in society or dictate how property is distributed.
Okay, so right, you're right, but my response to that is to say true, but again, there are people who want hierarchy to dominate. I mean, there are people who are not comfortable.
Let them try to play the violin and have the symphony conductor yell at them, and they'll feel dominated. I mean, there are people who want. What you're really saying is there are people who have religious convictions about how society overall should be structured and who want to have divinely ordained, leaders that have the power to control every aspect of our, especially say, sexual lives. For instance.
That's a manifestation of the propensity. Yes.
Yeah. And what I would say is that in a fully worked out socialist society, there would be nothing stopping those people from working out their kinks however they wanted to, but the end and expressing their desire for that to be the dominant mode of social organizations, as well. I just think that in a society in which no one is having to sell their labor to survive and their material needs are met in a more interesting and probably more cooperative way, that the chance of that hierarchical form retaking society is really low. And and I think that's the case. And I also think that a lot of people who claim to be good liberals also gain from time to time in different contexts submitting to authority.
Of course.
And look, it's built into learning to submit to authority. When you try to learn something new, you are not going to understand what you're trying to learn initially. And in order to be open enough to learn something new, you're going to have to submit to the authority of whoever it is that you're trying to learn from, whether it's in a book or an instructor,
subject matter expert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So submission to the authority of knowledge is a good, but it so it's a tricky thing. I'm not an anti-authoritarian like in some pure way. I think that the problem is more objective than we like to think it is, and that means that if we were to reorganize our productive life, we would find that the ways in which we were asked to submit to authority would be tremendously altered. Hopefully, in a way that also meant that there was more freedom. But freedom and responsibility, and even freedom and submission to authority, are not mutually exclusive. They're not really in opposition fundamentally.
Well, I think you're right. Here's the challenge. The challenge is, you've got to sell that to people who, you've got to sell that socialist vision to people who have a natural comfort with knowing their place in the hierarchy, right? And so you've got to figure out a way to describe that vision in using language that they'll be comfortable with, and that's where the left so far has just fallen on its face.
Right. I mean, I don't think that I would want to campaign on the things that I've said today in the last 5-10 minutes in this live stream. Luckily, I don't ever get called upon to campaign. But I think you could campaign on giving workers more control over their workday without losing very many people.
I think you definitely could. There's a lot of, back to Florida. When I talk to people in Florida, I know a lot of people here who are Republicans and Trump supporters, and when I talk to people, it's most people just will, and again, this sounds elitist, but and it is elitist, but it's not meant to be, and that is most people simply don't exert much cognitive effort at understanding the world outside of their very close proximity of family and job and so on. Most people will just never take the time to really make a study of politics, of political philosophy, of what they actually believe, right? People just don't do that. I mean, some people do, right? But most people just don't. They're looking for easy explanations, right? They're looking for someone to say something that will reinforce their existing belief about the world and so on and so forth, and give them solutions that don't require a lot of additional cognitive effort. And Republicans do that. They just do that better than Democrats. They do that, socialists. The socialist argument, to me, has an element of additional cognitive expenditure that I think most people find unappealing.
I don't know. I mean, listen, tomorrow I'm going to be releasing a podcast with a guy named Steven. In fact, if we wanted to, I could run a clip on the stream, just the beginning of it, which I was editing today. And he's a Trump supporter. And he's also a fan of Sublation Media. And he's been on a few times. And here, actually, let me see if I can. I want to just for shits and giggles, I'll see if I can.
It'd be interesting to talk to that guy. So I bet you if I interview that guy, I bet you I can pull out of him what I'm talking about.
You think so?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's watch this here if we can. You're back. You are, you're looking more and more like a Marxist every time I see you. You're not a Marxist. You're our, in-house Trumpist.
My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's incredible.
Please clap.
No, they say, Trump, we love you too.
Please clap.
Trump's voters are by far, I'm at 68,
Please clap.
69%. I'm at 90%.
All right. I forgot. It goes on like that.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning.
So Yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to that guy because I bet you if I interviewed him, talked to him, I bet you I could pull out of him a comfort. The idea that Trump provides or Trump promises a kind of comfort that he cannot find in the Democrats.
Yeah, maybe. I'll have to have you talk to him. I should definitely. I know he'd be glad to. He'd be down for that.
Because I mean, honestly, I have a lot of friends who are Trump supporters. So, I can't. I just had to make the personal decision. As much as I hate Trump, and as much as I hate Trump and criticize Trump supporters, I had to make the personal decision that I was not going to let it impact personal relationships because there are just too many people out there. I mean, people I grew up with and so on, family who support him, and trying to understand that, I just have to come to the conclusion that, to support Trump, to really support him, and I don't mean this kind of both Democrats, Republicans suck, I'm just going to vote for Trump. I mean, people who really support him, people, true Trump believers. To be a true Trump believer, which there are a lot of people are, it means that you have to want, you're looking for a strong man. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for what George Lakoff calls the father, the strict father figure.
Here's what we should do, John. We should do one podcast series, maybe, or video series on Dugin, and another on Wilhelm Reich, on Wilhelm Reich's book, Listen, Little Man, which is his Marxist psychoanalytic explanation for the tendency towards authoritarianism in the population. And
psychoanalysis on sublation stuff.
Never be enough psychoanalysis. I have to do it 5 days a week. An hour a day, get that transference going. Wilhelm Reich's theory is that if everyone would just have truly powerful orgasms, they would escape from, and he was willing to help. Someone says, I've
got my, I'm going to go sit in my orgone box for a couple hours.
Right. Yeah. There's a Fellini movie called Orchestra Rehearsal, which is about this topic of whether or not to overturn the conductor and have the musicians conduct themselves. And I think I actually, when I was a teenager, may have seen this movie, and that may have influenced my memory of the debate about that. But I'm going to check that out again. Let's see. There's never too much psychoanalysis. Before we end the stream, we've gone over about, we're nearly 2 hours and 45 minutes in. What is it? Why do you say that we have too much psychoanalysis on sublation?
Just because, look, I don't want to discourage it because I'm not anti-psychoanalysis, but psychoanalysis is one way of conceptualizing. It is a form of psychology. Psychoanalysis hate it when you say that. It's not psychology. I know. I know. Okay. I was just reading a guy. I'm going to try to get this guy Russell Jacoby on, who wrote a book called Social Amnesia, and it starts out like the move to ego psychology is a denial of Freud and psychoanalysis. It's a regression away from a better understanding of the human psyche, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
And my own girlfriend, who's training to be a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist, if I say something like, there's this person's going to talk about psychoanalysis, he's a psychologist, she's like, those things aren't the same. Why is the psychologist talking about psychoanalysis?
Well, because, you could have a psychologist who trained in psychoanalysis. So you could have a psychologist, clinical psychologist, who was a psychoanalyst. A psychoanalyst. Anyway, point is, psychoanalysis is one way of conceptualizing, human mental life. There are others. So I think, if you're going a theory of politics, any kind of political undertaking has to have some model of the individual, right? So psychoanalysis is one way to look at the individual, but I think if it's the only tool you use, the only way, you're going to miss too many things.
You know what I like about psychoanalysis? I bet you do know what I like about psychoanalysis, other than it gives me something to talk about with my girlfriend.
Yeah, what?
It's that it's in line with the Enlightenment project of liberation, of self-emancipation, because
Sure.
the aim of Freudian psychoanalysis is it starts with the premise that, there's a realm of thought and there's a part of your psyche that determines your behavior that is unconscious, that is repressed, that you don't have access to, and that your ego is just, and your consciousness is just this little part of your mind. I love taking this quote from this segment from a Rick Roderick video, where in a Southern drawl he says it's like tiny garrison in an occupied and overrun city, the city of Rome. And the goal of psychoanalysis is to take all those parts of the city that are repressed, which are obscured, and bring them into this tiny garrison of your consciousness. And that's what I like about psychoanalysis, is that it's promised to give us more access to and more reasonable control over ourselves.
Sure.
And so,
but you see, that's really the goal of all psychologies, right? I mean, if you take a classic like okay, so I went to a very classic, typical PhD program in psychology, experimental. It was, when I started the program, it was called experimental psychology. Changed while I was there, it changed to cognitive and neurosciences, right? So it's a very typical kind of scientific psychology, right? So it thinks about the same kinds of problems as psychoanalysis. It just uses a different methodology for obtaining knowledge about them. So, point being, psychoanalysis is one way to look at the individual, but it's not the only way, and it can't be the only way. I mean, it can't be the only way. It just can't be. You're not going to develop a viable, cohesive political theory based on psychoanalysis. Not going to happen.
No, you have to add in the Marxism with the psychoanalysis, and then you read some Theodore Adorno.
Yeah. Boom. Yeah, that's all you got to do.
And then you organize the proletariat. They'll all watch your YouTube videos, and socialism is accomplished.
You spend your whole life in a used bookstore, and reading. Yeah,
that sounds great, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it might be, and you might enjoy it, but you're not gonna make.
I'm not going to win over the Trump supporters.
Yeah,
I am one Trump supporter at a time. Tomorrow starts with Steven. But what we've got a little news here from the New York Times. Right now, Fetterman is ahead by a point in Pennsylvania. Oz is closing the gap. It looks like it's moved. It was 50 to 48. Now it's 49% to 48%. 82% of the votes are in at this point. I'm predicting Fetterman loses Pennsylvania.
Really?
That's my call. Yeah, just be contrarian. I have no idea. And then I'm going to say Walker wins Georgia. Walker wins Georgia. Fetterman loses Pennsylvania. Republicans take the Senate. Republicans take the House. We get our infusion of Democratic Party supporting so-called leftists. Everything's reborn. The circle is unbroken. Repetition continues. That is my cynical.
Well, New York Times, the arrow for Senate is now pushing more towards Democrats.
Yeah, but you can't trust the liberal New York Times. You're right. No, you're right. The needle has moved.
Yeah, it's moved more to the left.
Weird. Okay, well, yeah. So I wonder where I'm not seeing here. Is there some seats that the Republicans were expected to win?
It could be in a state that looks red right now because of the precincts that have reported, and maybe
Like
You know,
Utah's going to go blue.
I don't.
Or
If I knew more about which precincts to look for in each state, I'd have a better idea. But I don't know.
well, if I'm wrong, I will certainly eat crow the next time we do this. And by the way, John, I quite enjoyed running a 3-hour stream with you. The time flew by, so we should figure out a name for this kind of thing and do it on the regular, maybe monthly.
We need to do more sort of current issue, real time things. I mean,
well, we have the Sublation Magazine show where we're supposed to be discussing.
Sure, but it tends to be a bit more esoteric. I mean, you know, which is, I mean, it's so basically, I mean, the articles in the magazine are a little, I mean, they're a little theory, a little, you know what I mean? It's not going to be as.
Right now, it's Can the Italian Left Learn to Meme by Mike Watson. That's up today. And then in Ukraine, Peace is Not Enough by Agan Hamza. And then we have Only Class Struggle Can Save the Left by Chris Wright. Psychoanalysis is Gaslighting
By Julie. Yeah, that was a good article.
I mean, yeah, so you're right. This is definitely, Sublation Magazine is a socialist magazine aimed at the socialist left.
Yeah,
and we need to make our YouTube channel a bit more,
which is great. I mean, which magazine's great, but we need to broaden the funnel to pull a wider audience into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's someone says, I want Doug Lain to be the president of the college in my town. Well, I would be glad to be that. But yeah, we're going to be doing. There are going to be some changes coming to Sublation. It's by the new year, and actually, I'm hoping to get the pamphlets out, and the first pamphlet out in November. Get people subscribed to getting pamphlets in the mail, and we're going to be the king of all Marxist media, which will be a very small kingdom, but nonetheless, that's the aim of Sublation. We got about 9 minutes to the hour, but I'm going to be. Someone says I want Doug Lain to be straight up president.
There you go.
I will gladly run. And John, would you be my VP if I ran for president?
As long as I don't have to do anything. If I can just like live in a VP mansion and hang out and meet celebrities, yeah.
Okay, sure. That sounds good to me. All right, I'm gonna end it here. Go check on my kid. Thanks everybody for watching. You heard my prediction. Republicans win on both the House and Senate. That's my prediction against the.
I'm gonna have to predict Dems keep Senate, lose House, just to be a little contrary.
Okay, all right. I think that's a pretty safe guess at this moment in the night. Mine is completely wild. But all right, thanks for watching, everybody.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living